1943. Unlike its smaller brethren, it was not distributed to Panzerjäger battalions, but retained in special detachments at corps level and farmed out according to need. Most of the 494 built served in Russia, but were encountered in Italy serving through to war's end. The standard field gun employed by the German army at divisional level from the time of its introduction in 1935 to the end of the war was the 105mm FH-18. This piece saw service on every front, from the frozen wastes of northern Finland to the boiling desert of North Africa. A versatile and widely employed weapon, the FH-18 utilised a split-trail carriage and, in earlier models, large pressed steel centre rubber-tyred wheels. On later variants, these were replaced with spoke types. Firing a 14.8 kilogram shell, it could range out to a maximum distance of approximately 10,500 metres. Experience in the east, where the gun's weight caused it to sink in the mud, led to the employment of a lighter carriage derived from the 75mm Pak 40 anti-tank gun, while the 2514 and the 3-ton 11 half-tracks were employed to tow the 105mm gun in North Africa and Russia. The bulk of those employed in Europe and the East relied on horse-drawn artillery teams. In 1939, a muzzle brake was added to increase the range of the gun. Designed in 1942 to confer greater mobility for the 105mm guns attached to mobile formations, the Vesper self-propelled gun employed a much modified Panzer II chassis. Although designed by Alket, production was undertaken by Farmo. In February 1943, the decision was taken to divert the production of all Panzer II chassis to the manufacture of the Vesper. The new self-propelled gun first saw employment during Operation Citadel, the Kursk offensive in July 1943. Seen in action are those belonging to the SP detachment of the 3rd SS Panzergrenadier Division Totenkopf. From mid-1943 onwards, the Vesper began to appear in growing numbers in the self-propelled artillery units of the Panzer and Panzergrenadier divisions. Equipment of formations in the east received priority, as the need of mobile artillery to move and support the rapidly moving panzer formations became paramount, as they were stretched ever more thinly, being moved from one place to another to combat ever-increasing Soviet breakthrough. The ability of panzer formations to deploy their own mobile artillery allowed them to maximize their limited assets when launching counterattacks against the seemingly ever-growing Red Army. Deployed close to the front line, the Vespers would launch a concentrated barrage prior to the attack and then accompany the armour as it moved forward. Ad hoc battle groups comprising many diverse weapons, including Vespers, were rapidly put together by the Germans to deal with enemy breakthroughs, such as seen here in the late summer of 1944. A local counterattack is launched by German forces supported by Stukas in western Byelorussia. Overseeing the operation is Luftwaffe General Robert Ritter von Greem. After the preliminary air bombardment, German infantry moved forward to deal with the enemy. The weaponry employed in the Kampfergruppe includes Panther tanks, Marder 3 tank destroyers, armoured personnel carriers, mobile flak artillery, towed 88mm flak guns and self-propelled artillery support, provided by a small detachment of Vespers. The appearance of the Soviet Air Force flying Ilyushin II Sturmovix leads to a barrage of anti-aircraft fire from the 88mm guns. The Soviet aircraft try and target the panzers moving across the plain. A number are hit and shot down as 37mm guns join in the anti-aircraft barrage. The Vesper detachment now brings its guns to bear on identified enemy positions prior to a further infantry assault. Mobile 20mm flak Vierling now joins in fire as the aerial battle with the attacking Soviet Ilyushin IIs continues unabated. German ground troops move forward under attack from the Soviet aircraft as the flak guns continue to pour fire into the air to provide a protective barrage to the ground forces. Sturmovik, hit by German flak, plunges to the ground. Although bombs from the Soviet aircraft still fall, German infantry continues to move forward. While casualties are moved from the field, the battle with the attacking Soviet ground attack aircraft continues unabated. Bombing and artillery fire combine to reduce the near horizon to a wall of explosions. In the final sequence, the 88mm flak score another victim as a Soviet fighter streams smoke before diving to the ground. While the Vespa was generally welcomed by its operators, it was not without its faults. The Panzer II chassis made for a small vehicle, and the fighting compartment mounted at the rear of the machine was quite constricted for the four-man crew to service the gun. In common with other open-top self-propelled weapons, it offered little protection, and it had a high silhouette. Nonetheless, the 676 produced, in addition to 159 munitions carriers that were employed to transport the 105mm ammunition, served well through to the end of the war. They were encountered not just in the East, but also in Western Europe by the Allies from June 1944 onwards. Reference has already been made to the extensive use the Germans made of captured French tanks for self-propelled guns. One of the most filmed employed an extensively modified Hotchkiss light tank chassis to mount the 105mm howitzer. 48 of these self-propelled guns were produced for units serving in France in 1942. These saw extensive action with the 8th Panzer Artillery Battalion in the Normandy campaign. They served alongside Lorraine tracked carriers, also modified to carry the 105mm FH-18. Just 24 of these were produced. As with all German vehicles serving in Normandy, a prerequisite for survival was the need to operate from cover. Although the distinctive camouflage scheme of overall sand with large block sections of olive green was effective, it was necessary to augment this by employing the trees and hedges of the Normandy countryside to hide from the constant presence of highly effective Allied fighter bombers. Once in place, the crew prepared the ammunition and began to fire. These SPs carried about 32 rounds, a similar amount to that of the Vespa. They are seen operating with a detachment of Hummel heavy SP guns from an SS Panzer division. Entering service in 1933, the SIG-33 equipped the heavy gun platoons of infantry regiments and remained in service until 1945. Limited to a maximum range of just 4,700 metres, its task was to lay down heavy fire and suppress enemy opposition as German infantry went into the attack. Its shell was relatively heavy at 38 kilograms, and the gun had a rate of fire of between 2 and 3 rounds per minute. It was this that saw it employed on the first self-propelled artillery vehicle developed for the German army. The decision to mount the SIG-33 on a self-propelled chassis led to the employment of the Panzer I-B. The mount was designed by Alket of Berlin, who converted 38 Panzer I chassis in February 1940, and these were in service for the French campaign. The resultant vehicle weighed some 3 tons more than the standard Panzer I-B. The 150mm gun was mounted in a large box-shaped compartment atop the hull and looked decidedly cumbersome. It was taken into battle by 6 heavy infantry gun companies in May 1940, each being attached to a panzer division. The only film of this vehicle in action shows it being used to effect, to blast defences as German infantry moved through a French town. In general, the vehicle proved successful in action and was later employed in the Balkans and Russia, finally disappearing from the battlefield in late 1943 when the survivors were serving with the 5th Panzer Division in the east. No others were built, for it was recognised that the gun overtaxed the light chassis and the very high silhouette was undesirable. An attempt to mount the SIG-33 on a Panzer II chassis in 1941 proved abortive, just 12 being built. Nevertheless, the SIG-33 on the Panzer I-B provided the German army with much formative experience in the operation of self-propelled artillery. The most numerous self-propelled types to mount the SIG-33 were those that employed the Panzer 38T chassis. Both models produced were known as the Bison. The first emerged in February 1943 and used the tank chassis with the gun mounted forward inside a box-like superstructure. As these weapons were required for service in the forthcoming summer campaign, the first 90 of the type seen here were converted using Panzer 38T Model H's returned from the front and then issued to heavy infantry gun companies of Panzer Grenadier divisions. The Bison saw widespread service in 1943 and was employed in Tunisia, France and Russia. The example seen here belonging to the Waffen-SS was employed in the Battle of Kursk in July. Small numbers were also encountered in Normandy in 1944. Seen in Milan in August 1943, where it was sent for security duties after its mauling at Kursk, is this rarely filmed 38T Bison belonging to the 1st SS Panzer Grenadier Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. It passes a late Marder III belonging to the Panzer Jager Battalion of the division. 282 of the final model of the Bison saw the SIG-33 mounted on the identical 38T chassis as used for the late model Marder III tank hunter. The SIG-33 was also employed in 1941 to produce a powerful, fully armoured infantry assault gun on the Panzer IIIe and F8 chassis. Series production was not undertaken, just 24 being produced. These served at Stalingrad in 1942, with the survivors operating in the Kuban bridgehead in southern Russia. Making its debut with the 216th Sturmpanzer Abteilung at the Battle of Kursk in July 1943 were 60 Sturmpanzer IV Brumbars. This machine had been designed as a heavy armoured assault vehicle and had found particular favour with Hitler, who'd ordered its production in October 1942. The SIG-33 was ball-mounted in a very heavy armoured box with 100 mm of armour to the front and 50 mm on the side. The first version lacked a forward-firing machine gun and the driver's vision slit was mounted low down on the front superstructure face. The mid-production Brumbar could be distinguished by the periscope mounted on the driver's housing. A fleeting glimpse of a late-model Brumbar can be caught behind the vehicle's crew as they line up to be presented with decorations for their bravery whilst engaged in heavy fighting with British forces on the border with Holland. The armoured superstructure of the Brumbar offered comparatively greater protection and space for its five-man crew than did the hull and turret of a standard Panzer IV. In addition, the late model Brumbar had been substantially reworked to incorporate significant improvements to the design. The omission of a machine gun for close-in defence was rectified by fitting a ball mount high on the left side of the front superstructure plate. Armoured configuration on the front plate was also improved. The calibre of the standard heavy artillery piece of the German army throughout the war was 150 mm. These weapons were employed in a number of different versions. While the bulk of this heavy artillery was horse-drawn, those 150mm FH-18s attached to panzer divisions were towed. Each panzer division had 3 battalions of artillery, 1 heavy, each with 3 batteries of 4 guns towed by an 8-ton half-track. While the speed with which half-tracks could bring the heavy weapons up to the front line was impressive, compared to the ponderous horse artillery, the setting up of the piece to fire on its designated target might take up to half an hour. The performance of the weapon itself, however, was satisfactory, the FH-18 being able to fire a shell of 43.5 kilograms out to 13,000 metres. What the mobile formations desired was a fully tracked vehicle that could mount a 150mm gun and be available for employment on demand. They had to wait until 1943. The prototype of the Hummel self-propelled gun mounted a 150mm howitzer with a large muzzle brake on a Panzer III-4 chassis. It appeared in 1942 when the decision was taken to commit it to production. Hummels first saw action during Operation Citadel in July 43, these being operated by the Heavy Artillery Battalion of the SS Panzer Grenadier Division Totenkopf. Early Hummels can be recognised by the driver's compartment, which stood proud of the sloping front plate. In the later model, this compartment was extended across the whole front of the vehicle. When not in use, the 150mm howitzer was locked in place by the large bracket mounted on the glacis plate. The Hummel shared the open-top superstructure made of thin armour plating found on all German self-propelled guns at this time. This was less problematic for the crew inasmuch as they opened fire some distance away from the main fighting and were not so vulnerable as the crews of Panzerjäger. Initial allotment of Hummels was limited, just 6 being allocated to receiving Panzer divisions together with a number of the ammunition-carrying variants to help resupply the self-propelled guns in the field. These were necessary vehicles as the Hummel only carried 18 rounds of 150mm ammunition on board, and these were often rapidly expended once a barrage began. The availability of the Hummel gave the Panzer divisions the heavy punch to hit the Soviet forces whenever they were required to launch a counter-attack to contest a new breakthrough. Although the Hummel was always regarded as interim solution, pending development of a purpose-designed SP gun, these were never enough to satisfy demand. Often Hummels were seen to be firing alongside the smaller Vespa self-propelled guns as seen here in Hungary in early 1945 while fighting around Budapest. It was perhaps symptomatic of the waning strength of German military power that when Dr. Goebbels chose to make a last visit to the Oder front in March 1945, he was taken to watch the firing of a solitary Hummel. This vehicle had proved itself to be an extremely effective weapon, and by the time production ended in 1944, 666 gun vehicles and 150 resupply vehicles had been constructed by Alket and Deutsche Eisenwerk. The German army entered the Second World War in possession of a range of unique and highly effective light anti-aircraft guns that were to be employed throughout the conflict with great success. The light 20mm Flak 30 emerged in the 1930s and was already in widespread service when this film about the Luftwaffe was put out by the Air Ministry. Drawn by Krupp Boxers, the light flak guns are driven to their fire positions. The gun is then unhitched and slid off its carrying chassis onto its base and made ready for firing. The soldier wearing the rangefinder calls out the distance as two Dornier Do-23s lumber overhead. The flak gun is speedily turned on its axis to follow the planes round by the crew as the gunner lets fly at the targets. 6 years later, the same procedure is followed as the flak fires on Allied aircraft over the Straits of Messina. As a crewman stands watch on a flak Vierling in Russia, another opens fire on Allied warplanes over southern Italy. Joined by a 37mm flak and single 20mm flak, the three weapons employed on the most German self-propelled flak vehicles until 1945 and used in action from the Arctic Ocean to the Aegean and the Bay of Biscay to the Black Sea. The DMAG 1-ton half-track was the first vehicle to be employed for the purpose of mounting a flak gun. Initially the type was armed with a 20mm Flak 30 cannon, but this was later superseded by the Flak 38. Although ostensibly designed for the purpose of protecting military formations from air attack, this variant was employed as much in a ground support role. The 20mm cannon was ideally suited for shooting up ground targets, being supplied with armour-piercing as well as high-explosive ammunition. In the opening phases of the Russian campaign, it was discovered that the flak could be used to penetrate the thin armour of the very numerous and obsolescent Soviet light tanks. Although ammunition was carried in 6 small bins attached to the drop sides of the flatbed on which the gun was mounted,